I have got a giant stack of games on this table because it's mid-July, and everyone knows what mid-July means. It's time to talk about the best games of 2023. That's right. Why do it at New Year's when you can do it 6 months later? This is going to be my top 10 games that were new to me in the year 2023. So we've got a blank table, and we're going to be going over my top 10 games of the year for 2023. I am going to skip on honorable mentions in terms of showing them, just because I feel like it would make the video really long. But I will include those as well, probably when we get to the halfway point. Yeah, I know that I've dithered on this video for way too long. I had plans to do it over winter break, and then in January, and then February, and then life just got away from me, and then by that time I was doing a lot of gaming for the channel, so I haven't really gotten around to getting everything off the shelf and really evaluating what my top 10 of last year were. But I'm doing it now, okay? And it's only 5 months until Christmas rolls around again, so we'll have this pretty close together, which is fun for everyone, right? Everyone loves that. So let's start with my number 10 game of 2023. Oh, and just to clarify, these games may not have come out in 2023. They may have come out earlier than that, but these are the first time I played them was in 2023, so they're considered new to me. Most of them are actually from 2023, but a few of them are going to be older than that. And of course, I always want to hear what you have to say about the best games that you played, or if you agree or disagree with any of my picks here. Remember, this is just my personal taste, and I'll try and explain why it made my top 10 when we go over it. So let's get to number 10. Number 10, The Hunt by Matthias Kramer and Engin Kunter. This was published by Salt and Pepper Games. And this was, I like to think of this game as sort of the follow-up to Watergate, which was Matthias Kramer's other sort of small box CDG with like some really interesting and well-developed design mechanics. So this game is a two-player game that uses cards to drive action on this board of the Atlantic Ocean. One player plays the Germans and the Admiral Graf Spee. The other player plays Britain and the Royal Navy. And the goal of the game is to, as the British player, get some certain number of convoys safely to their destination during World War II. And the German player, his object is to sink a number of British convoys during World War II. It's a very small footprint game, but it is really big on strategic depth. Each side is going to have a deck of cards with just some absolutely fantastic artwork on them. And in traditional CDG style, you'll be able to play them for actions with the number or the event, or sometimes both. Each deck is unique and features some fantastic, like I said, very great artwork. It's a really fun system of spending your action points. It's a hidden movement game, so the Graf Spee is usually not on the map, and the German player has to document which hex it's moving to, while the British are trying to figure out where the Graf Spee is. And then the Royal Navy, which I have no counters out here right now, can come out and try and search for it and try and bring it to combat. And the game can end early, actually, if the British Navy successfully brings the Graf Spee to battle, and then there's a sort of battle sequence that will happen that will end the game one way or the other, and you can use these cards to kind of further enhance your finding, the searching ability of the British Navy, or you can save them for a battle if you're able to successfully do it. The British successfully defeat the Graf Spee in battle. They win the game. It is a very quick playing game, plays in about 30 to 40 minutes, sometimes less, if one player suffers some effects of fate and or the British player gets lucky. But it's really replayable. All the games that I've played have kind of gone a little bit differently. And what I like to call this game, when I try and sell it to people, is it's kind of like Atlantic Chase condensed to like a 30 half hour. It's got that same vibe, the hidden movement, trying to destroy the convoys. You've got one ship as the Germans rather than a whole fleet, and the British Navy only has a few ships rather than the whole fleet. But regardless, it does cover the entire Atlantic. And it's just a really well-designed, tightly designed game. This is one of those games that I can play with people who aren't war game fans, because while it is a war game, the trappings don't feel very war game-ish, right? These counters are huge 1-inch counters with some great art on them. When you destroy a convoy, you can leave the smoking ruins on the map. The artwork is really evocative, and the mechanics are very simple. You can play the whole game off of the player aid cards that come with it. All the rules that you need to play with someone are right here. And it's a relatively simple game, but there's a lot of strategic depth. So that's why The Hunt is my number 10 game of 2023. It's a fantastic production, and I highly recommend you give it a play. Especially good if you're at like a convention and you need something as like a wind down or an opener, but you really want that war game feel with some crunchy decisions. This is the one. Number 9 on my list, Mr. President, the American Presidency, 2001 to 2020. This game, well, first of all, it was the hotness when it came out for quite a while. A lot of people paying attention to this game, not even wargamers necessarily. And then it found its share of controversy and its share of adherence, and wow, what a game. I only played it once, which is why it's probably lower on my list than maybe it could be. But man, that one playthrough was so rich and interesting, and I just felt like I just scratched the surface to this amazing narrative engine that really captures at least some elements of sort of the popular view of the American presidency and the role that plays in world affairs. It's a massive footprint game. I had to set it up across my dining room table with the leaf extended, and still I had trouble fitting everything on there. But boy, the experience it delivers is so interesting and just really flavorful, thematic. It really, what I think I like most about it is sort of like its thesis on the American presidency. Ultimately, the designer Gene Billingsley talks about in the designer's note that he believes that the American president ultimately is a force for good in the world, and the game really reflects that. But it also reflects the fact that you're just one man or woman, and you don't have direct control over everything that happens. There's this whole spiraling chaos and order that's occurring all around the globe with different nations and different territories, and even domestically at home with Congress and all that stuff. And so really, when you play the game, you're really just kind of gently nudging things in directions. You can focus your efforts and have a more direct impact in certain places, but ultimately it feels like this is a huge job that is almost too much for one person. And the fact that it's been squeezed down into a game that one person can play is really amazing. I think special kudos goes to the development work on this game. A game this large and intimidating plays extremely breezy, and that is primarily thanks to this turn sequence flipbook that basically just walks you through everything you do on a turn, every single phase, one step at a time, and eventually you realize that the game is actually not that difficult. It is procedural, but you have this flipbook that guides you through every phase as you go, and once you get through the first, half a year, full year on this turn track, you really get a sense, okay, I know kind of what I'm going to be able to expect now, quarter by quarter, year by year of my presidency. And there's just so much opportunity for replayability. The deck of cards, which I don't even have out here, is amazing in terms of like the amount of stuff that can happen that you might never see again in a game. There's the number of boards is crazy. The documentation, the reference manual, the scenarios, the example of playing designer's notes, the charts and the booklets that let you govern other world powers. It is just such a rich, compelling, interesting experience. This is the kind of game that I think, not many people are making in terms of like, what would it be like to assume the role of a particular person or job in wargaming? A lot of times you get, okay, well, I'm the commander of forces, but really the focus is on the forces, or I am a single tank or plane or vehicle or whatever, but like, or a squadron leader, but like you very rarely get games that really focus in on a singular person. And games like Mr. President and possibly I, Napoleon, which is coming out right now, I really want to see more of that. Like, what is it like to live in a specific individual's shoes and how that impacts, sort of a larger context. And Mr. President is fantastic. I think if there's a downside I have about it is that they were so quick with the second edition and fixes. Obviously, with a game this large, it's really tough to check everything that you need to check once it gets out into the wild and has thousands of plays. But the second edition, it has the fact that there's going to be some updated components has really kept me from playing this again or having it set up and playing it over a course of a long period of time. So I'm eager to get that stuff released. I know GMT is as well. And I'm going to be digging into this a lot more later this year when that comes out, or possibly early next. The one other thing I'll say is it makes a great co-op game. You can assign, and I did this with my friends, you assign a different role in the cabinet. So you have someone playing the president, and then the vice president, the chief of staff, the secretary of state, and the secretary of defense. And when you get to those phases in the turn, you have those players essentially making the advisory decisions for their role, their region. And you can really get into the role play of it. And so I think that's a great way to bring other people and to have them get this experience with you in a way that's very free-flowing and not restrictive, and you can come and go as you please. So Mr. President, number 9. If I had played it more, it might be higher, and I'm really looking forward to diving back into it. My number 8 game of 2023, David Thompson and Trevor Benjamin's Undaunted Battle of Britain. Wow, what a game. I had not played the Undaunted series before I picked this up. And actually, I picked this up just kind of on a whim. I know everyone had been talking about Undaunted and how fun it was. infantry, small scale infantry is not really interesting to me, especially World War II. But I had a gift card to a local game store that I got, and I was like, well, you know what? They had Undaunted Battle of Britain. It had just come out. I decided to pick it up. It was the exact amount of the gift card. I brought it home, and boy, was I really surprised. First of all, no square tiles. It's made the jump to hexes. The artwork from sort of the overhead perspective of the aerial view of France and England is really evocative and cool. And the mechanics around flying your planes, you're always pointing at a hex edge and moving forward, and you're using these cards to dictate what you're going to be doing on your turn. At its heart, it's a deck builder. But when you play your cards for activations, you're trying to maneuver into position. Here's some German planes. Trying to maneuver in position where you can kind of get around and get some flank shots or get on someone's six. There's a nice methodology for staying in comms with your wingman. And the scenarios are really interesting. You can play through a whole 10 scenario campaign, and while there are no rules that link the scenarios, you can kind of do fun things like talk about who's your MVP pilot. Each deck comes with all these different pilots, and I really like that they represented the different ethnicities of the. So you got some Indian pilots here from obviously the Royal Air Force, the Germans. There's some German folks in the German deck, and it's just a really interesting. And there's some nice little tweaks. I really like that it's hex based rather than square based, like I said. But you've got things like terrain, quote unquote, that add some interesting things to think about. The different aircraft handle differently. So piloting the German Heinkel is so slow. You're plodding along at one hex, but you can really unload your payload on certain targets when you're going after bombing targets. And the scenarios have a nice mix of stuff happening. So sometimes it's just a straight dogfight between aircraft. Sometimes, you're trying to take out specific targets like these ships. You might have a scenario where the Germans are trying to bomb the Royal Navy, and, there's a card in the British deck when they draw it that the boats just move. Or there's a card for anti-aircraft emplacements. So it's just a really, really well-rounded game. You can play a scenario in as little as an hour once you get the mechanics down. I actually did a watch and play night where we played the Dunkirk scenario from this box and then watched the movie Dunkirk. And it was pretty amazing how there were, the person I played it with had never seen Dunkirk. And there was things that were happening in the scenario where I was like, oh my God, when we see the movie, that exact thing happens. And so we were recreating some of the stuff from the film on the tabletop, which was really cool. It's got a very cinematic flair to it. It feels very, there's not a lot of, you start very organized with your planes and your wingmen. And then suddenly, as the fight goes on and the dogfight starts to swirl, you might get separated, and it becomes very controlled chaos about how you activate your planes, how you get them back within comms range of each other, and how you can, circle around and attack your opponents. It's just a great time. It's very accessible as a game, but there's a lot of strategic considerations when you're playing. And once you get a hang of how the different planes maneuver and where their strong suits are, typically the BF-109s are faster, but some of the British planes have different gun sights. Some of the Stukas for the Germans can shoot out the back. So there's just a lot of really cool stuff that's very evocative of World War II with a very low overhead of rules and a deck building mechanic. So people who are not war gamers could even appreciate this if they're used to playing deck building games. I love it. I think Undaunted Battle of Britain, I haven't played the other ones, but I just feel like it'd be very difficult to topple this from my sort of potential rankings of games in this series. Now, I do want to play some of the other ones, but this to me is very captivating and was captivating when I saw it more than any of the others in the series. If you haven't played Undaunted Battle of Britain, it's a fantastic lightweight air combat game that really gives a good feel for air combat in a way that I didn't expect. And it's super fun to play against your friends. You set up a couple scenarios with these modular tiles and you just go at it in the skies. Number 7, Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich by Chad Jensen and John Butterfield and Kai Jensen, who deserves some credit for getting this one together. This is a very sublime playing game. Strategic scale or grand operational, potentially. World War II starts at the German high water mark of World War II, and it's all about the collapse from the attacks from each front by the Allies. It is so unique in terms of how it plays. It's got a little bit of everything, and all these elements come together and work together so well to kind of generate this fun like second half of World War II pseudo sandbox. It generally plays along historical lines, but there are, you know, abilities to go off the script, basically. You can see all of the possible locations for the landings for Normandy. You get to choose, the Allies do, where they want to land. You could land there. You can, you know, you can decide to land, start the main D-Day in Toulon and, you know, make Operation Dragoon the focus. And it's just got such a great scope to it while being very playable. It borrows some mechanisms from block games. I don't have any of the units out right now, but the units sort of rotate like a block, and that determines their strength points. So definitely more of a strategic feel there, but it also uses cards. You have this hand of cards that let you do different things, potentially help you in battle. And sort of the big hook about this game is that each player is controlling two factions. So one player is playing the Soviets on the East Front, but they're then playing the Germans on the West Front, and the other player is playing the Allies on the West Front, but is playing the Germans on the East Front, and it becomes kind of this race who can get to Germany first, who can do better with their Allied faction while stopping the other faction with their German faction. And it's a really cool feel. It kind of reminds me of the Mighty Endeavor somewhat. And there's some really unique mechanics. So to take actions in this game, you have this cup of orders that come out randomly along this action track. And then when it's one of your faction's turn to go, you choose one of those orders and you place it on your action matrix here. Because you only are going to get a certain number of orders, and each order takes a certain amount of initiative. And so you have these four faction, the track is up here across the top, but there's this track across the top of the map. You're going to move your marker that many initiative steps forward, and you might trigger an event, and that also determines the turn order, because whoever has the lowest value initiative gets to go next and select their order. So you're constantly playing with this idea that, like, I want to make big moves, but if I do, I'm not going to get another turn for a while. And so you get this very nice campaign tempo, operational tempo with the different factions. One of the things I encountered, I was playing the Soviets and the West Front Germans. You know, every time I would get the Soviet war machine in close to attack the Germans, typically Soviet actions take more initiative. Then the East Front Germans would pull back, and I wasn't able to execute my attacks, and so I was just this slow giving ground. It has a really nice playability. If there's a downside to it, it's that it is a very long game. Even the short scenario will take you a long time. Each turn is 90 initiative, right? So you're talking about anywhere between 6 to 10 orders per faction to get there. And so it can feel like this is going to be an all-day game or possibly 2-day game. That said, it never feels slow. It always feels interactive. It's always very tense and interesting. And I just really, really loved what I've experienced out of Downfall. I can't wait to play it again, probably at a convention. But yeah, Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich has sort of Chad Jensen's sort of iconography and simple mechanic-driven design philosophy with John Butterfield's talent for balance and play feel, and it's just a really solid World War II game with some really novel mechanics for how you execute the war and where it ends up historically. So yeah, if you haven't tried Downfall, you should definitely give it a chance. It may not be as simulation-y as most World War II gamers would want, but I don't think that hurts it. I think that's actually a benefit because it gives you a new, fresh way to look at how you can have a war game about World War II that doesn't involve tons of charts or really long downtime between turns. Number 6, we're headed to the American Civil War. And my pick here is not actually a single game. It is a series, and that is the Blind Sword series. This was the year 2023 that I really started to explore Civil War, more tactical games. And I think of all the ones that I played, Blind Swords had to have been my favorite. It's, again, another example of Civil War games having really interesting mechanics, even though I'm not a fan or scholar or whatever, aficionado of the history. And it just seems like every Civil War game has some really interesting stuff going on, and that is no exception with Blind Swords. I have not played all of them, but I have played many of them, and I'm going to use The Day Was Ours. This is First Bull Run, Volume 6 in Revolution Games Blind Sword Civil War series. Of all of the ones that I have played so far, The Day Was Ours is probably my most favorite. It was definitely the most competitive and the most tense and the most compelling. It's obviously got a Rick Barber map. As the series has had that for quite a while. Some new artists now on the series with the more recent entries. But it's a beautiful game to look at. The counters are blue and gray, as you would expect. Here, I'll show you some of the counters. Units are regiments as part of brigade activations. So you get a really nice flavor for the battles of the Civil War and their sort of maneuver unit scale. And what I really like about the system, it's chip pull, so it's very soloable. But even when you're playing face-to-face, a lot of crazy stuff can happen. And that's partly because the combat tables allow for such a number of different effects of combat, of fire combat, of melee combat. You never quite know what's going to happen. It's very non-deterministic in terms of like the things that happen. Sometimes you might have a really fatigued, wrecked, brigade holding out against a fresh unit, and they just roll poorly, and they take, and you manage to stay in there. Or, sometimes you get like these crazy artillery results that really throw a wrench into your plans. The combat system is probably one of its most distinct features. I really love the ability, the variability that it brings to the feel of the game. It's a tactical game that doesn't feel repetitive because so much different stuff happens every turn. And it's just basically played off of these 2 pages, essentially, for the combat. The other thing I really like about it that adds to the sort of variability and replayability is the event chit system. So not only will you draw chits for your brigades to activate, you'll also draw chits for different random events. And all of these are unique per game for the most part. So, for example, in this one, Blackberries, the Confederates, so the Union, when you get this chit, you can potentially move back your reinforcements. And it affects when they arrive. And I remember when I played this game with my friend, he got every single turn of the game, he failed the Blackberry roll because his units were out picking Blackberries and they never showed up at the battle, which is hilarious. And that run of luck might never happen again in that way, And it's a very interactive game. It's got a very good look to it. It's very playable. And there's so much ground to cover in the Civil War with different battles and the way that the designers can make the chit availability reflect the history and the chrome of what historically happened, combined with the unpredictability of the combat. It's just it's a joy to play. I have never regretted playing a Blind Swords game. Well, with maybe the exception of one, but that's a different story. And it's not even Blind Sword. It's kind of a spin-off of the system. But yeah, there's a lot of content. It's very well supported. I think I have all of them at this point, and there's more coming. I know that there's a Shiloh game coming. That's going to be massive. It's a 2-mapper. But most of these games are 1 map, and they come with 1 counter sheet or 2 counter sheets. So they're very manageable, and they give you a great Civil War tactical experience that you can play in half a day or a full day. They're great to look at, and they're just super fulfilling and rewarding because every time you break, even if I busted out Day Was Ours again, it would play out somewhat differently than the first time I played it. And I think that's really the series' main selling point, is that you get so much variability even with a single game in the system. So yeah, Blind Swords, that's my number 6. I'm going to be playing a lot more of this just kind of continuously, just because anytime I want some Civil War tactical, it's going to be my go-to. My number 5 top game of 2023 was La Primo Janita, or La Primo Janita, the 1941 East African campaign. This is from Legion War Games, a game designed by Kim Kanger. First of all, so this came out really early in 2023, I think in January. It was one of the first games released, and I remember everyone was kind of talking about it. It was like the first big release that got a lot of buzz in the wargaming space in 2023. I immediately was taken by this for a number of reasons, but I immediately got to the table, and I was really blown away by how great this game actually is. So it is about sort of a little-known topic, which is the British and the Italians fighting over the Italian East Africa colonies in Somalia and Eritrea. And what's unique about it is this order system. So each side has a collection of orders chits, and every turn you're going to select 4 of them, and each of the chits has a different initiative number on it. And so based on, I believe it's low to high or possibly high to low, you're going to execute those orders. And so that changes up the turn actions every turn in terms of who's doing what and what you're doing. And so you've got 3 different kinds of orders. I think there's some rules about you have to choose some number of main, minor, or combination orders. And each side does that in secret, and then you put them on this order track here, and you execute them all. And so there's a lot of strategy in terms of like what you're doing with your units. Are you going to save up for a big artillery barrage and then attack? Or do you need some time to reorganize your units that have, become disordered from counterattacks or from defending? Do you want to, what are the other things you can do? You can dig in. Like there's, I think, like 23 orders per side. So there's a lot of wide open sandbox for what you want to do with your units. And I'm so surprised that no one has taken this order system into other theaters and other war games, because it actually feels very, very cohesive in terms of like commanding an army and trying to get them to do what you want. So we can see the map here. It's very brown because we're talking about East Africa, but generally the British come in from this side. The Italians are trying to hold them off and defend, and the British are trying to capture these locations for, I believe they're worth victory points. And it's just a really great game. There's a player aid that comes with the game that talks about what all the orders do, what each one does. Some of the orders are the same for each side, but they have different initiative values. So you can see here that like a limited bombardment is earlier in the turn order for the Italians and later in the turn order for the British. So there's a nice asymmetry to the game that's really awesome. And I played the full 10-turn campaign when this first came out, and I loved it, and I've been wanting to get it back to the table again. I'm surprised people haven't continued to talk about this. For what it is, it's extremely playable, even though it is very novel and unique. And then the other thing I should mention about this, too, and the reason I really like this game, is that designer Dan Bullock, who you may know from various other titles for Dietz Foundation and Compass, he actually created a template online to turn the orders chits, if you don't like that system, into cards. And so he made that available on Board Game Geek, and you can get these printed. He tells you where you can get them printed. It was, I think, like very cheap. It was like $7 or something like that plus shipping. So you have these cards, and so if you don't want to play with the player aids and the chits, you can just give each player a deck of these cards. And he very nicely, I mean, like the template he used for these is really nice. You've got the initiative in the corner, what the order does all in one space, so you don't have to cross-reference the chit and the player aid. And you just play the cards, and then you just resolve the cards in initiative order. So I think that's a great addition to this game. I decided to get them made because when I play it again, I think new players would appreciate having all the information for their orders in one spot. And he just did a fantastic job with photographs for the artwork. And it tells you exactly what the order does and what kind of order it is. So you can, put these out in front of you or have them in a deck and then choose your orders. It looks like it makes the game quite a bit more user intuitive, which is awesome. And yeah, this is La Primo Janita from Legion War Games. Definitely don't sleep on this one. This one is a surprising dark horse for me. I didn't expect to like it as much as I did, and the topic is really interesting as well, and it's a part of World War II we hardly ever get games on, and Kim Kanger has done 2 games on this topic, so he knows what he's talking about. So yeah, definitely check out La Prima Janita. My number 4 game of 2023 was 1812 War on the Great Lakes Frontier from Compass Games. This game is marvelous. I have played it, the full campaign, a couple of times, and I have had so much fun both times. It is excellent. It is a game that is designed well, that was developed well, that is produced so amazingly gorgeously. I mean, the cards, it's a card-driven game, but sort of unlike most card-driven games, but absolutely beautiful artwork on the cards. It's got really unique mechanics, and it's about the War of 1812 on the Great Lakes Theater. So it's a 2-mapper if you play the whole thing, but there are a ton of 1-map scenarios that you can play, including a learning scenario that's just about the Niagara area. But essentially, goes all the way from Quebec all the way west. The other map would take you all the way to Lake Huron and Ohio on Lake Erie. And it is just a phenomenal experience. It's got the right amount of chrome to reflect the period without making it laborious to play. And like I said, it's a CDG. So if you like CDGs, this is one not to miss. I think it executes the history and the mechanics so brilliantly. The map is gorgeous. I love all the little touches on it. I did do an after-action report from the first game I played of this. You should go check that out if you haven't, if you've been curious about this game. It tells a great story, a great narrative, and there's a lot of strategic depth here because you have to really get to know the card decks over multiple plays to really sort of like fine tune and hone your strategy. The second game I played, first game I played, I was the Americans, and I ended up, I think I ended up winning as the Americans. The second game I played as the British, and I almost won an auto victory. I managed to take control of Lake Champlain. I marched a British army all the way down here and was 1 spot away from taking Albany, which would have been an auto win, but the Americans held out against the forces of Great Britain. But there's a lot going on. You can see most of the map is made up of water spaces. The naval game plays a huge component in this. And the interplay between infantry, ground units, and naval units is extremely important, and I think really reflects why the War of 1812, or any war really, the waterways of Northeast North America are so important to Army logistics, and it does that extremely well. There's a very unique combat system in this game, so it kind of reminds me of Battles of the American Revolution. You're actually using D8s and D6s, and based on the strategy you choose for a battle, you get some little bonus, and then based on what the other person has chosen, that determines your dice pool. So there's an attacker and defender kind of combat matrix that happens here. You can play out the battles tactically or pseudo-tactically on this little display, or you can use a chart. Naval battles are the same way. The designer put sort of everything he knows about this history into this game, and he really, really, really honed the mechanics to just like perfectly fine sheen. this is I will never let this game leave my collection. In terms of games about the War of 1812, there are very few of them, but all of them are typically really good. What I call the Daredevil syndrome of war game topics, in the sense that Daredevil as a Marvel character has had sort of the most consistent, best runs over the years by different writers. 1812 kind of has that as well. There's just a lot of really good War of 1812 games, even though there's not a lot of them. So yeah, this is one not to miss. I think this is one of Compass's finest games that they've ever produced, both from a production standpoint and a gameplay standpoint. You just really can't go wrong. And the amount of scenarios in here means you can work up to the full thing. It's not a hard game to play, but it's a hard game to play well. And there's a lot you have to consider with the supply situation and where your boats are positioned. You never have enough actions to do everything you want. And so it's this really, really interesting puzzle of, how do you go about winning the game with limited resources. So yeah, one of my tops for sure. One of my favorite CDGs. And just so full of flavor and history here. So that is War on the Great Lakes Frontier, 1812 from Compass. Before we get to the top three, just want to talk about a couple honorable mentions. First honorable mention, Europa Universalis. That game is massive. I've played it a couple times. I really, really like how it translates the scope of the PC game to the tabletop. The reason it didn't make the list, I think there's a little too much downtime in terms of between player turns, and I think that the ability to... there are definitely actions in that game that are more efficient and better than other actions. And so that's why, in my plays at least, I've seen very few wars, and going to war is very costly and complicated. And some of the rules around peace around after wars and sort of the way the board is laid out, it's very unintuitive. It's great fun, especially if you get a group that can play it over and over. But it didn't make my top 10 because of some of those things that would relegate it to being sort of a once a year, twice a year game or a convention game. The other honorable mention that I have is from Clash of Arms, and it's Legion of Honor. Now, that's not a new game that came out quite a while ago, but it is a card-based role-playing game as if you were a soldier in Napoleon's army for the entire Napoleonic period. It is hilarious. One of the funniest games I think I've ever played. So much narrative generation there, and because it's multiplayer, everyone's kind of at the table enjoying it together. And obviously, it's got sort of like we're all in this together, we're all sort of compatriots, but you can duel each other, you can go on campaign with Napoleon, you can fight in his battles. It's a great game, and like Mr. President, it puts you in the shoes of a single person in a period of history in a way that very few other games do. So my two honorable mentions for 2023, Europa Universalis, excited to get back more into that when I can get my group together, and Legion of Honor, which I want to play so much more of. It was such a revelation in terms of the mechanics and the originality and how absolutely hilarious it was on the table. Okay, my number 3 game of 2023, Votes for Women, 1848 to 1920, the women's suffrage movement, designed by Tori Brown, published by Fort Circle Games. I think that might be, each position on this list so far, I think, has had a different publisher, which I think really goes to show you the state of wargaming right now. Is Votes for Women a war game? I don't know. I definitely consider it a historical strategy game and a war game if you define war as things other than just kinetic conflict. This is obviously about the 70-plus year struggle for women to get the right to vote in the United States. Takes its inspiration very heavily from games like 1960 and Twilight Struggle. Ostensibly, the game is very simple. What you're doing is using cards for events or campaigning in the various regions around the United States, putting cubes in each of the individual states, trying to get Congress to ratify the right for women to vote into the Constitution, and then getting state legislatures to approve that amendment. But there's a lot of historical flavor here. There's so many cards. Each side has its own deck. What I really like about it is that you can play it one-on-one, you can play it solo, you can play it cooperatively against the bot, you can play it 2v2, you can play it 2v1. The care that has gone into making sure that this game is accessible at various player accounts has helped me get this to the table so many times over the last year or so since it came out. And what I think has been really great is that this topic, the subject material, Votes for Women, has let me get the game to the table with other female friends of mine who don't play games, definitely don't play historical strategy games, and they've been really interested and involved in the game and really loved it and loved the experience. And I think that's a great thing for this game to be doing. It's a gateway into sort of the historical strategy game space for people who wouldn't normally think about it. I love that we have a game that's about a topic that is extremely important and is not about kinetic warfare and builds upon games that have come before in terms of mechanics and feel. The game is very finely balanced. Every game I played of this has come down really to the wire. In fact, I had one game come down to the final roll of the final state in the post-game amendment ratification rolls. So it's just been thrilling every time. And I really like the new additions that the game has added to this kind of genre of game. There are these strategy cards that you can bid on. And so by decreasing the amount of efficacy you have in the upcoming turn, you can get these powerful once per game bonuses that you can deploy at any time. And there's also this random draw of state cards at the beginning of the game. And these are, again, one time per game bonuses. And if you are the first player to sort of control that state, influence that state one way or the other to your side, you can use these powerful bonuses. So there's just the amount of passion that went into this game is very clear. The designer, Tori Brown, obviously, it's very personal to her. She even included a personal photograph for the art for one of the cards from her, I think, grandmother, which is really cool. But the artwork is great. Lots of period appropriate artwork, and actual sort of campaign imagery from across the era. And obviously big historical events that are happening in the country during this time are also in the deck. So you've got things like the U.S. Civil War and other amendments, and the struggle between them, the struggle between the two sides, the suffragists and anti-suffragists, and you really feel sort of the sweep of momentum as you play the game, no matter what side you're playing, if you can do really well. The other thing I want to comment on about this game that I really, really love is Fort Circle's production quality. So they didn't have to do it, but as you saw in my unboxing, they included a ton of replica historical materials from the women's suffrage movement in the box as just historical context and flavor and examples from this period. And they had, this is an extra cost. They didn't have to do that, but I love that they did that. It really makes the history come alive. It really gives you a sense of like the challenges that different people and organizations faced. We actually, we did a movie night and played this, the movie about women's suffrage. Why can't I remember what it's called right now? I want to call it like Steel Winged Angels or something like that. Anyways, it's about some of the characters or some of the people that were on the cards in this game, and about sort of the World War I era women's suffrage activity that was going on. Iron Jawed Angels. There we go. That's what I'm talking. So we did a watch of Iron Jawed Angels, and we played this game. And it was a great night. We had a couple women play the game with us, and they were like, we want to take the anti-suffragist side. So we kind of like gender bent the the cause, which is really fun. Just a great game. Fantastic. Plays really quickly, very seamless to play, very easy to teach, and very, a lot of CDGs really focus in on making you feel like I need, ops or event. That's a really tough choice. Not so in this game. I think in this game, typically you want to take the event, but the back and forth card play really sort of like lends the conflict. Like you're trying to outmaneuver the other player with, what events you play and what order you play them in. And then there are opportunities to not use the event and to really like lock down specific regions. I remember when we were playing our game after Iron Jawed Angels, the Northeast was constantly in flux, but in terms of the Midwest, I mean, the suffragists had the Midwest locked down really early, before 1900. So if you haven't played Votes for Women, definitely give it a shot. It's a very elegant game. Let's put it that way. It's a very elegant game that's very well produced. They just got a second printing, so it should still be available. And it's phenomenal, especially if you like CDGs, and especially if you want CDGs that you can play with friends who don't normally game, or you have bigger player counts than just 2 people. This is my number 3 game of the year. I love it. My number 2 game of 2023 is absolutely exceptional, and there's a reason it was nominated for Charles S. Robert Awards. That is We Are Coming, Nineveh, from Nuts Publishing. Again, another unique publisher on this list. This is about the 2017 campaign to take back the city of Mosul from the Islamic State by Iraqi security forces. It's not a light subject matter. Obviously, this is something that was extremely bloody and hard fought and happened not too long ago. And the fact that there's a game on it already is very striking and interesting. But it is a phenomenal, phenomenal game. And I don't even know where to begin to tell you that. So first of all, if you haven't seen, it's a block game. And both sides, whether you're the Islamic State, Daesh, or you are the Iraqi security forces, you have blocks, and you're going to set up your blocks on this area map that represents sort of the city of Mosul and the outskirts of Mosul. This is the old city, and this is where Daesh was holed up during the campaign. And then you've got the Iraqi security forces coming sort of in these directions along these highways and through these urban areas. I love the map, and sort of like you can see just how difficult house to house, building to building they had to fight. There's actually a movie on Netflix about this that I really want to watch after I play this again. But what's cool about the game is that it is tracked in 3 sort of victory vectors. So there's the timeline. How fast can the Iraqi security forces liberate Mosul? And the game is up to 12 turns, and the longer the game goes, the less likely it is the Iraqi security forces win. You're also tracking casualties and collateral damage to the city. The higher these get, the less likely the Iraqi security forces win. You're trying to keep all three of them low. At the beginning of the game, each side is going to choose one of those three criteria that's going to count double, right? So you're making a bet if you're Daesh that like, oh, I think that there are going to be more casualties, therefore let's count it double and make the Iraqis lose. The Iraqi security forces are also choosing one that they think is going to be the least important. And so you're making this wager before you begin how you set up your campaign. How am I going to achieve victory here if one of these sort of three victory vectors is going to cost me dearly? Secondly, before you begin the game, you have this giant deck of capabilities, and you're going to choose based on a point system, almost like a minis game, what sort of your strategy is going to be. And there's so many possible options here. Daesh, they've got their basic units, militia and rumors and veterans. You can get IEDs, you can get vehicles, technicals, you can get a stay behind force. There's child soldiers, which is really grim. Arms caches, which help you. There's an IED factory that lets you pump out more units. Additional IEDs to start the game with. You've got this media center to broadcast propaganda. There's snipers, drones, chemical weapons, an escape plan. And all of these cards interact with one another in different ways. Local spy network, interact with each other in different ways to sort of give you a strategy for how you're going to wage this campaign, this 6-month campaign? Yeah, 6-month campaign. And so every time you play, you can choose a different loadout, essentially, for what you want to do in the game and how you want to go about trying to win. And they play vastly differently. I've played this game several times now, and having the open setup where you choose the different abilities that your side has leads to much different gameplay calculations when you're playing. Here's the Iraqi Defense Forces. You can do things like have a field hospital so your casualties or collateral damage are lower, or have a rules of engagement so that civilians are preserved. You can operational pause, to take some time. That gives Daesh an ability to like jigger their forces and get in more defensible positions. Humanitarian assistance. You can have helicopters, intelligence. There's different types of air attacks. You've got helicopters, artillery, air support, coalition support. So this would be like the U.S. and other Western nations aiding in this campaign. SIG intelligence, so digital, signal intercepts. There's just so many possible different loadouts you can have with this game. The deck is so thick. You're really only going to be taking about 12 of these every game. And so the ones you choose are going to definitely flavor the campaign in ways that you might not have tried before. It's such a simple game. It is very easy to play. You're basically on your turn going to activate your blocks and move them from one area to another, resolve some combat, and it's just based on dice rolling. And then, you take hits, you rotate your blocks, but the different types of units have different characteristics. Ultimately, the game postulates that Daesh is going to lose eventually. They are going to be pushed back to the old city. It's how well can they prevent the Iraqi security forces from reaching the old city. And then once you get into the old city, the very close in, street fights in these old medieval and earlier neighborhoods, like how that impacts the way that units perform. Vehicles can't go in here. So even though the Iraqi security forces start with tanks that can move really far along these roads, eventually, when you push Daesh to the old city, they're not able to go in there, so you're not able to use their power. And so it's this really interesting progression of a game, this campaign. And in addition to that, there's this huge deck. This is half of it. There's this huge deck of event cards that can happen. So anytime on, I believe, a combat roll that you roll a 1, or some of the cards have a 6 on them, you're going to flip the top event card. And these have all sorts of things happening. Maybe there's some extra collateral damage that happens as a result of the battle you just had. Or, maybe you preserve, some of the forces are don't take as many hits. This one, poor coordination hampers operations. You disrupt a unit that has, different command units from different commands for the Iraqi security forces. You can get things like, what's this one? Open fire. 9th Armored Division units may fire into the old city, right? So, but then you might cause collateral damage if you get a casualty kill. So there's all sorts of random things that can happen. And this deck is huge. It's like 80 cards, something like that, and 80 to 100 cards. And so based on how you roll, you might get different things happening. It's just such a phenomenal game by 2 first-time designers who then worked with Brian Train and Rex Brennan. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name, to really massage this into something that is, I think, a modern classic. It's recent history. It's a very compelling gameplay experience. It really puts you into the shoes of what was going on and the different challenges that both sides faced. And the ability to customize your experience every time you play is excellent. This is becoming kind of a subgenre of game. Littoral Commander from Dietz also kind of uses this concept where before the game begins, you have all these capabilities and every game is different. We are coming in of a well-deserved recognition from the Wargame Critics community for the Charles S. Roberts Awards. I can't praise it highly enough. This is a game I'll play anytime. It plays in about 2 to 3 hours. Super quick, but super interesting and compelling and engaging the whole way through. And once you're done, you're going to want to set it up and try it again, given how much variability is in this package. So Nuts really knocked it out of the park with this one. I think it's phenomenal. Okay, we are at my number one game of 2023. Any guesses? Do we know what it's going to be? Well, I don't think it'll be a surprise, and it's definitely not a game that is new. It's came out several years ago, and it is part of a system. And really, this number one pick is the system, but specifically this game in that system, and that is A Pragmatic War: The War of Austrian Succession, a game using the No Peace Without Spain system from Compass Games. I played this system, 3 of the 4 at least, this year, and boy, did it blow me away. First of all, I already have a proclivity towards the Age of Reason. There are not enough games about the Age of Reason. There's certainly not enough games about the Age of Reason that are strategic or operational in nature. And I played this. I forget exactly how I came to it. I think because I was trying to find some games about the War of Austrian Succession that wasn't Maria, that sort of had that scope to it. So I picked up Pragmatic War. I think it was on sale, maybe, from Compass. Wow. Absolutely blew me away. And I know that's controversial because a lot of people find this system to be bland and milquetoast, but I actually don't know where that point of view comes from. I think this system is perfect for what it's trying to achieve here. So let me open this up and we'll take a look. So here's the map of Europe in 1741 as the War of Austrian Succession is kind of getting underway. What I really like about this game is the way, very similar to Paths of Glory, how the conflict starts very localized and then balloons to cover the entire continent. The game starts, obviously, with Frederick the Great and Prussia fighting the Austria over Silesia here. Some things can happen, and then as the turns go on, you can start to get other powers entering the war. You've got the Piedmontese down here, the Genoese, the Piedmontese, France. You can even go Spain. Spanish soldiers are in this game. You've got the Holy Roman Empire. You've got the Dutch, the British, and obviously the Bavarians and the Austrians. And so what starts as this conflict over Silesia balloons up as the game goes along, and suddenly France, who's the richest and most powerful nation, comes online, and they're starting to move in this direction, and then the British enter, and you just get this like really great, you can see how the war sort of like turned into this conflagration. What I really like about this system is that it's very playable. There's not a lot of chrome. What it feels like to me is a 2-player version of Here I Stand or Virgin Queen without all of the excess mechanics around each of the player powers. So if you really like the core engine of Here I Stand and Virgin Queen, which is using cards to affect military operations on a map and roll a bunch of dice in combat, you'll be very at home here because that is ultimately what this game is about. The game uses 2 types of cards, and so it is a CDG, but not in the traditional sense. It uses operations cards, which are literally just cards numbered 1 through 4, I believe, or 1 through 3. I think there's a 4 in here. There's 1 4, I believe. 1 through 3, and you get a hand of 5 of these every turn, and you just use these cards, you play them, and that's how many action points you get. And you can do a lot of things with your action points. You can move around the map with your armies. You can besiege fortified locations. It's a very siege-heavy game. You can claim spaces, sort of similar to any CDG where you flag it for yourself. You can engage in naval combat. It's sort of abstracted naval combat between Britain and France in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. And all of those things come together in a very streamlined, accessible way to score victory points. So you score victory points for every fortress that you take. You can score victory points if your national leader wins a combat for having a big, overwhelming victory. But then on top of that, you've got these event cards, and every turn, each player is going to draw one, or possibly every other turn in this game. It's different game to game. And these event cards sort of bring the historical events that happened. So, for example, here we've got the Jacobite Rebellion, the 45 in 1745, that pulls British troops away to go deal with that. We've got, the capture of Louisburg by I think it's did the British capture it? Yeah, the British captured Louisburg from the French during the North American theater of this war. And so you just get, here's Frederick the Great re-entering. So, once he takes Silesia, he leaves for several years, then he comes back into the war. And it's possible that those things don't happen in that order, so there's some historical variability there. But I think overall, it just plays very, very smoothly. It gives you a great sense of sort of the strategic decision making that you would be making with the different nations and how you score victory points, where you choose to, do your sieges or, make a defensive, be defensive against the attackers. And it just comes together in like a really nice way that I just really, really love. It's all about the strategy. Because you're not having to choose ops or events, something I normally hate, because you're not having to choose ops or events, kind of in a given turn how much you're going to be able to accomplish with your actions. You might hold one of these very valuable event cards for, a specific combat or a specific moment. And there's all this historical chrome around when the powers come in. You can see on the turn track here, some powers switch sides. And so there's this dynamic evolution of the board. It doesn't ever get very static, even though it is a siege-heavy game. It's just very fun to play. The counters are really nice. Here's the French. Here's the Allies. It's all strength point based, so one counter, one strength point is a core of about 10,000 men. So you can get, you get sort of the large armies collecting of the period under a leader, but primarily it's going to be very highly focused hot zones on the map. And this whole system has been a real revelation to me. I love that they've made the period accessible and interesting, something you can play in a single sitting, probably anywhere between 4 and 6 hours any of these games would play. Pragmatic War is by far my favorite of the bunch that I've played. I think it's the most interesting, the most dynamic, the most sprawling, the most epic. But I've also played No Peace Without Spain, which is about the War of Spanish Succession about 40 years before this. That one's also a great game with a whole different set of challenges for each side. The Spanish part of the map is actually opened up, and Spain plays a much bigger part than Austria, for example. I've also played the Anglo-Dutch War one, No Peace Without Honor. That one highly focuses on the Netherlands and France's war with the Dutch. And that one's really interesting as well and feels so much different because it's such a localized conflict. The only one I haven't played is 9 Years. I own it. I haven't played it. It's the only one Compass has not done a deluxe edition of. I am lobbying very hard to change that. But that one's about the 9 Years' War, right before the War of Spanish Succession. And then Chris Van Beurden, who has designed some great games, Europe in Turmoil, Barbarians at the Gates, the recently released Sparta. He's working on a 30 Years' War version of this system. So when that comes out, you'll be able to play from the 30 Years' War all the way through the War of Spanish Succession kind of unbroken, because there are campaign rules to connect some of these games. Pragmatic War is the only one that doesn't have the campaign rule connection because so much time passes between the end of the War of Spanish Succession and the start of the War of Austrian Succession. But once the 30 Years' War, No Peace for 30 Years, when that comes out, you'll be able to play from basically the defenestration of Prague all the way through the 30 Years' War to Louis XIV's wars after the 30 Years' War. So the Anglo-Dutch War, the War of the Grand Alliance, the War of Spanish Succession. And there'll be rules to connect all of those games into one long campaign. So the way that you finish a game in this system will then carry over to the next one. And so you can have this custom sort of ahistorical path that these wars took. I think that these games are very nicely balanced. I really think they bring a lot of tension and player interactivity. The turns are really snappy. I mean, when you play a 1-point card, you're basically like, okay, I'm going to do a siege, and then your turn is done and it goes to the other player, or I'm going to do a naval combat. Nothing ever bogs down. It feels very interactive in that way. And the chrome in each game is unique. And while there is a continuity to all of the games in the system, they all feel different to reflect their particular conflict. So the people who say that they're just kind of vanilla and boring, I don't understand really why they think that. Yes, they're not as complex as something like a Paths of Glory or a Pursuit of Glory or, some of the larger, like For the People or Empire of the Sun. They don't have as many moving parts as those games. But I think this era of warfare didn't also have that many moving parts. And so I think it really reflects, it gives you a great period feel while being more accessible and more straightforward in the same way that the technology and the doctrine of the time was. And like I said, I'm very partial to Age of Reason, so I really want to get more games about the Age of Reason out there and published. Hope designers who find this period fascinating are kind of working on that. But in the meantime, Pragmatic War, my favorite game of 2023. I will play this game anytime with anyone. Don't care if I have to teach it. It's got such a grand scope, and I love the visual style, and I love the stories that it tells. So there you go. 10 games in 2023 that were new to me or had just recently come out. And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed this look and this review. I'm sorry it was 6 months late, but hey, I'm the only one doing it in the middle of the year, so maybe I'll make that a thing moving forward. Let me know your thoughts about the list, about your favorite games of 2023 and stuff that you're looking to play this year. And we'll do this again with the 2024 list at some indeterminate point in the future.